Good morning. Our process of moving people, moving them along is loving neighbors, getting into the lives of our neighbors, moving them to loving God. These are the two greatest commandments, to love God and to love your neighbors, and then moving them to serving others, to lift up your sleeves and to help other people who are in need. Our theme is God first. Our theme verse is Deuteronomy 6:7. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. Today, this quarter we're talking about God and family, and today we're going to run through all these so you can see what we did in the past. Today we're talking about motherhood. It's fitting that we're talking about God and family, how we build our relationship with God in the home, among each other. And first of all, I want to say Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. For those who could not be mothers for whatever reason, we honor you this day as well. For mothers who have lost children, we honor you, and we honor the children who you've lost as well. There are a lot of people who are really struggling today. This day is great for many people, and it's hard for many people. And so for those who have lost mothers, we're thinking of you as well. I want to talk about Rachel today because this is really important as we're talking about motherhood, because a lot of mothers, I think, really struggle with this idea that they just don't measure up, that there's this ideal, we talked about this before, like the ideal Christian family. Well, I think there's also this notion of what the ideal Christian mother looks like. And so we can have feelings of inadequacy and feelings of not measuring up. And we read through the Bible and we hear all of these women of such great spiritual strength. And we think, well, I'll probably never measure up to these great women of the Bible. Rachel is a really interesting story for a number of reasons, but I'm going to reread this text again after I show you here. To this day, there's a place, you're looking at it here, in Israel called Rachel's tomb. This is kind of the designated place where Rachel was buried, which we'll read about in the scriptures here. Whether it's the actual site or not is kind of debated. Commonly, this is definitely the site where the Israelites say this is where she's buried. This is where they come to pray. It's where they come to honor Rachel. But then other scholars say, well, this is a potential site. But there are other sites that are nearby. But we're talking about within a 2-mile radius of the possible burial site of Rachel. But this is traditionally, this is a spot. It's still here today. My understanding is that both Muslims and Christians, even though they honor the death of Rachel and the life of Rachel, they're not permitted to go here. You guys were in Israel, is that right? This is off limits. You guys didn't visit, yeah. So it's everything that I've read. Christians are not permitted to visit this. So you have to be Jewish to be able to enter. They actually have checkpoints leading up to Rachel's tomb. And so it's definitely very sacred ground. Rachel is known as the matriarch of the Israelites. They call her, to this day, Jewish people call her Mother Rachel, which is the Hebrew for Rachel. So if you ever want to mess with somebody who you know named Rachel, you can call her the Hebrew name Rachel. You got to get that ch in there. Here's the passage. They journeyed from Bethel. When they were still some distance from Ephrath, Ephrath, by the way, is modern-day Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. When they were some distance from Ephrath, Rachel went into labor, and she had hard labor. And when her labor was at its hardest, the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, for you have another son." And as her soul was departing, for she was dying, she called his name Ben Ben-oni, which means son of my sorrow, or it can mean son of my strength. Most likely she said son of my sorrow because she knew she was dying. But his father called him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. So Rachel died, and she was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem, and Jacob set up a pillar over her tomb. It is the pillar of Rachel's tomb, which is there to this day. Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Eder. So this is interesting that they call her the mother of Israel, and they honor her to this day. The Jewish people honor her because if you think about her life, and the background is really important. If you think about her life, it wasn't really the greatest, most luxurious, wonderful, motherly life. In fact, when you think about Jacob, he fell in love with Rachel. Remember that whole scene? He was at the well, and he sees Rachel, and he's like, that's the woman I'm going to marry. And guys, you know, like as my mom said, when I asked her, how do you know when it's the right one? When I was young and naive, and you know, my mom's answer was, when you know, you know. Kind of an unhelpful answer at the time, until I knew what she was talking about. Right? When you know, you know. And Jacob knew. And he said, Rachel is the woman I'm in love with. I want to marry her. And so he talked to Rachel's father, Laban, who was not an honest guy. And he said, well, you can have my daughter in marriage, but first you have to work for it. You have to work 7 years of hard labor on the farm. I'm giving you guys some ideas here, by the way. You got to work 7 years on the farm, hard labor, and then I'll give you my daughter Rachel. And so Jacob happily did it, and the scriptures say the 7 years were like 7 days. They went by really quickly because of his love for Rachel. So for 7 years he labored, honest labor, he worked very hard, and then Laban tricked him. They wore veils when they were married. Jacob didn't know that the person he was marrying was not Rachel, but it was her sister Leah. So Jacob marries Leah, and of course he's infuriated, rightfully so, that he was tricked. And so he talks to Laban and he says, what have you done to me? I've been honest, I did the hard work. I thought I was marrying Rachel, and instead for 7 years I labored and you gave me the wrong bride. And so he said, well, I'll give you Rachel, but you have to work another 7 years, which Jacob did. So for 7 more years, he worked, he labored. In the meantime, Leah was having children. She didn't have any problem having children. And so you started having the 12 sons, or the 12 tribes of Israel. Rachel, on the other hand, could not bear children. So not only did she have to wait to marry the man that she wanted to marry, and he had to wait for the woman he wanted to marry, but they couldn't have children together. They couldn't conceive. And if you think about the jealousy, it's natural to have jealousy and to be upset with God, to be upset with your father if you're Rachel, your father-in-law if you're Jacob. This is not an ideal situation, and it's very difficult. And if you remember, Jacob knew that he was blessed. Jacob knew that his offspring was the future of all of Israel. In fact, Jacob was renamed Israel. When he wrestled with God, God renamed him Israel. And so it's not an ideal way to enter into motherhood. For anybody who's ever struggled to have children, you know how heartbreaking that process is. And when you see other people have children, it's very, very challenging. And you always ask the question, well, why are all these other people who don't even want kids, right? That's the big issue. All these people who don't want kids, they don't treat their kids well, they abuse their kids, they have no problem getting pregnant, and I can't have kids. And Rachel wanted nothing but to be a mother, to have children and to bless them. And so she ends up having Joseph, which of course becomes a favorite. They fall in love with Joseph, and she finally conceives and has a kid. And then she gets pregnant again with the youngest. Ben ends up being the youngest of the tribes, the youngest of the brothers. She gets pregnant, and as she's having her baby, she knows she's going to die. And if we really step back and look at that, that's a really big amount of salt in the wounds. To live your whole life waiting for the man of your dreams. He has to labor, he has to work. Your father is an absolute deceiver, a liar, a cheat. You eventually get to marry the man of your dreams. You have one child, and your very next child, you're about to have that child, and you know you're going to breathe your last breath. She never, if you think about it, Rachel never got to enjoy her son Benjamin. And that's a hard truth. And that's not the end of the story, because we can look at that and be like, well, how terrible, and that's just awful, and Rachel, this poor woman lived this sad life and just never got to experience real joy. But Rachel ends up being the epitome of what motherhood looks like. In fact, the Jewish people today call her our mother, Rachel. She's the matriarch of all the Israelites to this day. Thousands of years later, she's considered the mother of Israel. Isn't that cool? There are some passages where she's mentioned. Jeremiah chapter 31:15, and these are really important passages, especially relating to Jesus. Jeremiah 31:15 says, "Thus says the Lord, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are no more." If you think about that, Rachel, who wanted nothing more than to become a mother, who suffered her entire life, who really struggled, even after she's dead, she's weeping over her children. She's weeping over Israel. She's weeping over not just Joseph and Benjamin, but she's weeping over all of the Israelites, all of the children who would follow. She's weeping over her grandchildren and their grandchildren, and on and on and on and on. She's weeping over them from her grave because she's a kind and compassionate person. She is the absolute picture of what motherhood looks like. If we think about the way that we honor mothers, we don't think about the mothers who really, really struggle. And they're the ones who should get the most honor. There was a post just the other day. In fact, I want to look it up. I usually don't look things up on the fly, and especially don't get on Facebook during a sermon, but this was so good. This is a woman who both Mom and I know. Her name is Sarah McDougall, and she is a victim's advocate, absolute sweetheart. She battled cancer really badly, and just has struggled with all kinds of health issues and mental health issues, and she's just the kindest, most compassionate person. Her children are, I think they're both autistic or on Asperger's, somewhere on the spectrum. She left a very abusive marriage, domestic violence. She's struggled financially, with all the medical stuff that went on. And then just a few months ago, she was driving, and the way she described it, she said, I was steering one way and the car just went off the road and went into a tree. Sounds to me, it was an old clunker, and it sounds like a tie rod end broke on it, and it veered her off. She hit a tree, got a massive concussion, and almost lost her life. She was also, when she was younger, she was in a really bad bus accident that they were on some charter bus on a school trip, and the bus had a really bad accident. It rolled over, and I believe several people died in that accident as well. But she wrote this just a few hours ago. She said, I just want to make an observation about advocacy workers. And we can insert the word mothers here, mothers of honor. She said this work in the twilight zone of turmoil and treachery within the faith community is most often carried out not by the most vigorous and vibrant of Christ's disciples. These trenches are not heavily populated with the fittest and most energetic and exuberant ones. The heavy lifting, the heartbreaking labor of carrying the most shattering stories of harm is commonly borne by those who are already on the fringes of exhaustion. Those who fill this space, who are willing to immerse themselves in the suffering of others ignored or dismissed by the shepherds at large, are quite often suffered themselves. And I don't mean sufferers as in survivors. I mean, these trenches of advocacy are filled, in all capitals, they are filled with women and some men who are juggling enough health issues of their own to flatten an elephant. We are a collective population of wellness-challenged individuals who live with diagnoses such as autoimmune disorders, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I don't know if I pronounced that right, dysautonomia, POTS, PTSD, Crohn's, celiac, cancers, chronic pain, chronic fatigue, traumatic brain injuries, and so many other conditions. In addition, there is a vastly disproportionate number of advocates who are neurodivergent, autistic, ADHD, etc., and who must work overtime to process and connect with the neurotypical population. So very many are constantly walking in the tightrope between expending energy to support others while caring for their family, and giving themselves permission to hide away and recharge as needed. And so we keep doing the work God has given us in a field no one chooses voluntarily. I see you, fellow warriors. I love you all immensely. That's the picture of somebody worthy of honor. When I think of mothers, I don't think of the mom who just pushes through and just makes life look easy and sneezes out success. And, I think of the Rachels. I think of the people who suffered their entire lives and whose last act of love was dying, who never got to hold her baby. And she refused to be comforted for her children. I think that was a selfless act. She didn't want to be comforted. She wanted that comfort to go to people who were losing her children because they were no more. What's interesting to me and what's important to me is that Jesus quotes Jeremiah about Mother Rachel, about Rachel. Is Matthew chapter 2, verses 17 and 18. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. And this was talking about the death by King Herod when he killed all the 2-year-olds and younger in Bethlehem. He heard that there was going to be this baby born that they were going to call a king, and he got jealous, and he said, we'll just take all the 2-year-olds and younger and have them all killed. And he actually executed that plan. He actually went through with it. And you know what's amazing about Rachel, who never got to hold her baby Benjamin in her arms? What's amazing is, as that was happening, Jesus says she was weeping and lamenting over her children. That's the kind of mother she was. So my message is, for all the mothers who are struggling, you struggle with self-esteem, you struggle with trying to just make it to the next day, you struggle with infertility, you struggle with losing children, whatever place you're at right now, know that you're precious and you're honored in the eyes of God. And know that what you do as a mother, whether you're a mother to your own children or whether you're a mother to other people's children, we have new foster parents as of Monday. We have a mother to 2 new children. Isn't that cool? Isn't that amazing? Know that you're honored and that the hard days are worth it. There are going to be days where you want to run through a wall. There are going to be hard days. And know that it's worth it. If you have that compassion for your children and you weep over your children and you lament over your children when you see things that are bad that are happening to them, you love them enough to weep over them, and you refuse to be comforted for the sake of your children, know that you're doing it right. God honors you, God loves you, and we want to build these kinds of homes to set in as an example to the world to say, this is what love looks like. This is the God who we honor and we love and we worship, and we want to ask you to fall in love with the same God. Go out this day, go out this week, be blessed, bless other people, and know that God loves you. If there's anybody this morning who's not yet taken that step to put Christ on in baptism, or if you have prayer needs, you can come up as we all stand and sing a song together.